The first sign that things were going sideways was the smell. Not the usual smell of orbital life support, recycled air, sterilized metal, and trace mildew from overly ambitious fern enthusiasts, but something earthy, spicy, and alarmingly aggressive. It snaked through the Harmony quadrant of Station Allure 7 like a sentient cloud with a vendetta. Officer Jelm, a lanky Delvian with translucent skin that darkened with anxiety, stiffened when he caught the scent. He looked up from his station console, where he was mediating a cargo dispute between two sulfur-based life forms, and immediately activated the localized biohazard alert. "There is contamination," he declared, his voice slightly shrill as he backed away from the vent. Unfortunately, by the time the alert pinged across the station's internal comms, it was already too late. In Habitat Module B, nestled inside what was generously described as the station's intercultural recreation zone, Derek Matthews was stirring a pot the size of a small escape pod. His face glistened with sweat, his nose running slightly from the pepper fumes wafting up from the chili he'd been nursing for the past 3 hours. His eyes were red but glowed with pride. "Okay, all right, baby, we're almost there," he muttered. "Slow-simmered beef, kidney beans, ghost pepper paste, and just a touch of Trinidad scorpion flakes. This is going to knock your boots into orbit." Derek, 38, originally from Barstow, California, was a mechanical engineer turned part-time culinary crusader. His posting on Allura 7 was supposed to be a 6-month rotation focusing on zero-G ducting systems. Somewhere along the way, it turned into a cross-cultural chili outreach program. He'd fed Andalians, Frocks, even one particularly open-minded Clorks diplomat. They loved it. Or at least, they politely survived it. Derek took that as victory. Today was special. It was Unity Day on Allura 7, a once-every-rotation celebration commemorating the peaceful coalition of 12 species that operated the station. Derek had volunteered to make chili for the potluck, calling it a classic Earth dish that brings people together through mutual sweating and emotional catharsis. Only one person had tried to stop him. Her name was Dr. Sari Tenbaugh, the station's chief biochemist and unofficial curator of Don't Let the Humans Kill Us All with Spices. She had intercepted Derek that morning as he rolled a cart of ingredients past the laboratory containment door. "Derek, I say this with admiration," she said, "but if you cook that chili in a sealed, rotating orbital habitat, we're going to have a problem." Derek just grinned. "Problem? More like a revelation. This batch is going to be the peak of chili evolution. I ran the ventilation specs and double-checked the allergen cross-reactions with the diplomatic roster. It's airtight, trust me." Sari had stared at him for a long moment before sighing and stepping aside. "Just don't add anything with capsaicin levels above 2 million Scoville units. You remember what happened last time. That was a fluke, and also Rodney dared me. No bets this time." The chili, unfortunately, was well above 2 million Scovilles. Derek had quietly substituted a blend of experimental freeze-dried Carolina Reapers he'd brought up in his personal stash, labeled as botanical specimens, to get them through customs. They were illegal on 3 coalition worlds and had to be handled with gloves. As he ladled the steaming mixture into thermally sealed bowls, a small green creature padded in on stilt-like legs. It was a Zarkeen named Mole, a species known for highly sensitive olfactory membranes and an inability to metabolize capsaicin. "Human, Derek," Mole said politely, his eyes watering instantly. "What is this cloud of agony?" "That, my friend," Derek said, beaming, "is tradition. Want to try some?" Mole took a microscopic taste. His upper limbs spasmed, and he collapsed, like a dropped puppet. Derek caught him and immediately called medbay. Okay, maybe he's allergic," Derek muttered, trying not to panic as he watched 2 more crew members enter and nearly retch from the air alone. The smell had begun to affect the station's ventilation system. The filtration units weren't built for complex organic aerosols with volatile chemical outputs. By the time the main hall had been prepped for Unity Day festivities, the spicy fog had infiltrated the general air circulation across 3 modules. That's when the alarms began. "Unidentified airborne irritant detected," the ship's AI Siri announced flatly. initiating isolation procedures. "Wait, it's just chili," Derek shouted into the nearest console. Pathogen not identified. Symptoms include ocular irritation, respiratory distress, temporary neurological confusion, and in one case, spontaneous nasal bleeding. A Xenthar diplomat fell over a catering table, clutching his thorax and shouting in panicked clicks. He thought he was under psychic attack. An Andulian guard fired a containment foam grenade into the rec room, mistakenly assuming a chemical weapon had been released. The foam mixed with the chilly fog and solidified into a hard, spicy crust over half the furniture. As the station sealed off affected modules, Derek was tackled by a medical drone and injected with a sedative. He awoke 5 hours later, restrained to a diagnostic bed. Sari sat beside him, pinching the bridge of her nose. "You made the chili, didn't you?" "Was supposed to be a bonding experience," Derek mumbled. Maul took a bite, and then everything got kinda spicy. "Derek, we had to seal off 1/3 of the station. Half the diplomatic corps has been transferred to orbital quarantine shuttles. The filtration units are permanently saturated. The Xenthar delegation declared us olfactorily compromised. Do you realize how many treaties that might unravel?" "Can I plead culinary insanity?" "No, but you're going to a disciplinary review board tomorrow." That review board included representatives from 9 different species, most of whom still visibly winced every time the word chili was mentioned. Derek tried to argue cultural exchange, even referencing historical Earth events like the Great Texas Chili Cook-Off of 2041, which had ended in only minor hospitalizations. The board was not swayed. The ruling was unanimous. Humans were banned from preparing chili on any space station governed by coalition law. Permanently. The judgment was logged into Interstellar regulation under Code ZR, April 1st, 12, Prohibition of High Volatility Terrestrial Culinary Activities, HVTCAs, Section 1, Chili. Cleanup took 3 weeks. Derek was reassigned to Outer Ring Maintenance, which had no cooking privileges and only freeze-dried rations. Sari sent him a single note during that time. "You could have just made a fruit salad." But Derek wasn't bitter. Not exactly. Because somewhere deep in his gut, past the regret, the shame, and the half-digested ghost peppers, he knew the chili had been worth it. After all, no one ever bonded over a fruit salad. 4 weeks had passed since the incident, but the scent lingered. Not in the physical sense. Engineers had cycled the air scrubbers 36 times, and even vented Module B to the vacuum of space twice, but in memory, in suspicion, in collective atmospheric trauma. Every time a human reached for a cooking utensil on Elora 7, someone from another species would quietly drift away. Derek Matthews had accepted his demotion with something approximating grace. His new workstation was on the Outer Ring's magnetic stabilizer array. It was lonely, cold, and entirely free of communal interaction, exactly what the review board had wanted. He spent most of his shifts checking stress indicators on massive rotating couplings and staring at the stars through his visor. His only companion out there was Dorian, a jovial exobiologist doing fieldwork on micrometeorite life forms. Dorian didn't care much about the chili fiasco. He'd missed the whole thing while out on a tethered excursion. "You really cook something that dropped a Clorox ambassador?" Dorian asked during a routine maintenance pause. "Not dropped," Derek corrected. "He lost muscular control and slid under a buffet table. It's different." Dorian snorted and passed him a nutrient bar. "You've got legends written about you on the lower decks. Someone painted a mural of a chili bowl with crossed spoons. I didn't want to be famous for that." But he was. The chili had become myth. Some whispered that Derek had weaponized Earth spices as a political message. Others insisted it was a social experiment gone rogue. A few simply believed he'd been trying to assassinate the Zarkeen with culinary warfare. Derek hadn't tried to correct any of it, at least until the day he got the call from logistics. "You're scheduled for a psychological assessment," the voice said flatly. "I just had one after the incident. This is unrelated. You've been flagged for unauthorized ingredient possession." Derek blinked. "I haven't cooked anything." Please report to Dr. Kesslin's office in Health Module 2. Dr. Kesslin, a giant blue-glassed visari known for analyzing stress behaviors in humans, had a gently rotating office with chairs sized for multiple species. Derek sat down and waited while the doctor finished examining a color-coded neural scan. "You've been behaving," Kesslin said without looking up. "That's good. Thank you. But you've also been growing plants in your quarters." Derek frowned. "Herbs, legal ones, station approved. Mostly mint. You had a pepper sprout, a seedling. It was ornamental. Your log says its name was Red Jack, and you sang to it during air cycle rotations." "Okay, yes, but that's not against protocol." Kesslin leaned forward. "You were cooking again, Derek. In your head. That's how it starts." "It was one incident," he said. "No one died. The Clorox ambassador even sent me a thank you note once the nosebleed stopped. Said he'd never felt so transcendently alive. You've become an icon of interspecies hazard, Mr. Matthews. You made food that caused 6 forms of respiratory collapse." Derek exhaled. "I miss being allowed to use cumin, that's all. You ever smell real cumin in 0G? It floats like magic." Kesslin made a note. "You're not in trouble yet, but if I see one more capsaicin-adjacent plant in your living module, I'm submitting a full behavior reassessment." Derek left the office and went straight to Hydroponics Lab 3. The lab's custodian was a reedy tech named Elma, who owed Derek a favor after he helped fix her oxygen regulation panel during an accidental sleep pod lockout. She didn't ask why he was there. She just handed him a datapad and nodded toward the restricted greenhouse section. He wandered among the rows of experimental flora. No chili, of course. But as he passed under a canopy of lemon balm and what looked suspiciously like earth cilantro, he found something odd. A small, unauthorized irrigation grid underneath a silver tarp. Beneath it were 7 healthy pepper plants. One bore deep purple fruits. Another had wrinkled red pods like miniature meteorites. None of them were on the approved registry. He touched one of the pods gently, and it left a spicy sting on his fingertip. Someone else had been growing outlaw peppers. Over the next few days, Derek tracked greenhouse usage logs. Most visitors were assigned to botanical research, but one entry stood out. An Ithari named Zune, known for nutritional analysis and an odd fondness for earth cuisine. Derek confronted him in the mess hall. "You're growing reapers in the hydroponics bay," he said bluntly, tray of food untouched. Zune blinked 3 of his eyes. "I call them harmony berries, for science. They're outlawed. You know why. I know your chili caused a diplomatic quarantine, yes, but I also know what flavor does to the neural pleasure centers. Your species unlocks something ancient, terrifying, addictive." Derek leaned in. "You're trying to recreate the chili, aren't you?" "I was perfecting it. With data, cross-species gustatory profiles. I had to understand the craving. I've run models. The spice euphoria threshold peaks just before respiratory failure. I call it the Matthews arc." "You named a pain curve after me?" Jun nodded enthusiastically. "We can tune it, make it safer, add modulation herbs, stabilizers. It doesn't have to be dangerous anymore." "You want me to help? You're the missing variable." Derek hesitated. It was insanity. Reckless. A violation of 3 interstellar bans and at least 1 executive edict. But when he thought about what chili could do, not to cause suffering, but to connect, he felt that old warmth in his chest. "All right," he said finally. "But we do it right this time. No shortcuts, no ghost peppers, and we test everything, rigorously." They began in secret. Tiny batches, microdoses, controlled environments with proper ventilation. They ran trials on inert samples and brought in willing participants under full medical supervision. Every spice level was meticulously recorded, every reaction logged. They called it Project Ember. After 6 weeks, they had a version that caused no known allergic responses, no loss of consciousness, and only one minor nosebleed from an overzealous grell who mistook the chili for a protein smoothie. They were close, too close. That's when the coalition sent a delegate. His name was Marcus Laveau, a diplomatic compliance officer assigned to review Allura 7's incident mitigation progress. Tall, stern, and famously devoid of humor, Marcus was known for shutting down 3 orbital festivals and revoking a planet's right to import cinnamon. He scheduled interviews, he reviewed logs, he visited Habitat Module B, which still bore the scorched ventilation scars of the original Chile catastrophe. And then he saw a kitchen towel tucked into Jun's workstation, marked with a tiny embroidered chili pepper. Marcus froze. Why is this here? Jun panicked and tried to lie. Derek stepped in. Because we're fixing it, he said. Marcus turned slowly. You admit to cooking. Again. Not just cooking. Innovating. Calibrating. We ran controlled trials. 0 casualties. This isn't a repeat. It's redemption. Marcus narrowed his eyes. You're risking an interspecies violation for flavor? Derek stood firm. I'm risking it for trust, for a shared table. Because when we eat together, we become something more than just neighbors in orbit. There was a long silence. Marcus finally said, I'll need to sample it. Jun almost dropped his ladle. You sure? Derek asked. For evaluation purposes only. They served him a quarter portion in a safety-sealed dish. He took 1 bite. His eyes watered. His jaw locked. He made no sound. Then, slowly, he nodded. Compliance will conduct a full review. Until then, cease all operations. Understood? Yes, sir, Derek said, heart pounding. As Marcus left, he paused at the door. It was not unpleasant. But it wasn't a yes. But it wasn't a ban, either. And that was a start. The review took 11 days. For each of those days, Derek was 1 bad data point away from reassignment to orbital waste management. Compliance Officer Marcus Laveau submitted his tasting notes with bureaucratic flair, calling the chili provocative, borderline subversive, and unexpectedly clarifying. The last one confused everyone until someone pointed out he probably meant it unironically. Meanwhile, word of Project Ember leaked. First, it was a technician who had helped install the secondary ventilation scrubbers for their test chamber. Then a pilot overheard Jun discussing capsaicin attenuation methods with a botanist over lunch. Within 48 hours, a queue had formed outside Derek's private quarters. Not angry mobs enthusiasts, curious, nervous, some even reverent. They brought samples from their own cultures, dried protein strips from the Corydons, marinated fibrous roots from the Plenari, a sweet-sour paste from a human Rahaxi hybrid chef who claimed she'd been dreaming of chili since childhood without knowing what it was. A food exchange began, unsanctioned but quietly tolerated. The mess hall turned into a clandestine market of spice-swapping and cautious spoonfuls. Jun created a flavor compatibility matrix with color-coded guidelines for cross-species digestion safety. Then came the medical oversight team. Dr. Elar Riven, a meticulous Tavari with 4 degrees and a face like a disappointed librarian, barged into Derek's workshop with a portable scanner and a personal escort drone. She demanded samples. Not for taste, for pathology. You're calling this stabilized, she said, scanning a ladle of Ember 7B, but you're not qualified to determine allergen compatibility for multi-species ingestion. We've been careful, Derek said. No fatalities, no incidents. We even built in a reversal agent. Jean calls it the coolant. It smells like compressed despair, she replied, sniffing the antidote. That's how you know it works. Dr. Riven paused, stared at the chili again, and then, with a tiny sigh, tasted it. 3 minutes of quiet note-taking followed. Then she said, You're not cleared, but you're not shut down. I'm submitting a cautionary approval to the Station Council under medical supervision clauses. It was as close to a miracle as Derek had expected. 2 days later, something changed. Derek walked into the cultural exchange deck and found it rearranged. Tables pushed together, bowls lined in symmetrical formations, a projected menu in 5 languages scrolled slowly overhead. It was Unity Day again. 1 rotation had passed since the Great Chili incident, almost to the hour. This time, the kitchen was regulated. Ventilation was doubled. Emergency decon units were on standby. Every participant signed a waiver and carried a personal absorption patch calibrated to their species' biochemistry. And in the center of the room stood the ember cauldron. Derek approached it with measured steps. The recipe had been refined, less heat, more balance. The flavor curve had been shaped like a parabola, starting warm, rising to euphoria, and tapering to contentment. It was, in a word, diplomatic. As guests filed in, there was tension, old memories. Muldazarkeen wore a sealed nasal filter and brought his own food, but nodded respectfully at Derek from across the room. The Zenthar ambassador returned too, this time flanked by 2 aides with hydration packs. He carried a tiny bowl and dipped in the faintest amount of chili. He didn't collapse, he actually nodded. And then, a surprise. Marcus Laveau returned, this time not in a compliance role. He wore civilian attire, gray tunic, no badges, and held a tray. "Thought you'd be busy filing reports," Derek said. "I'm between audits," Marcus replied, then added in a quieter tone, "and the memory of that flavor's been haunting me." He sampled the latest batch without fanfare. Then he sat down with the others. The room slowly filled with chatter, laughter, occasional coughing fits, and 1 emergency hydration spritz. The chili held its own. Sari, the chief biochemist who had once warned Derek never to cook again, arrived late. She didn't announce herself, just scooped a spoonful, studied it like a lab sample, and took a bite. After a long pause, she looked up. "It's not terrible." Derek's chest swelled. "That's the nicest thing anyone's said to me in months. Don't let it go to your head." The rest of Unity Day passed in peace. No lockouts, no quarantines, no diplomatic evacuations. Just people, humans and not, sharing a space, eating together, talking. That night, Derek sat alone on the edge of the observation deck, staring out at the blue curve of the nearby moon. Jeune joined him quietly. "You know," Jeune said, "you were almost exiled for that first batch. Worth it. And now it's an official dish. They're calling it Unity Chili in the logs." Derek shook his head. They still banned it, though. Technically, they banned the old recipe. And the new one? Pending cultural approval. Derek looked out at the stars, still holding a warm thermos of Ember 7B in his hand. For the first time in weeks, no one had flinched when he walked past holding a spoon. And he hadn't broken a single rule. Not this time. The motion passed by a margin of 1 vote. Jeune was the first to see the results on the station-wide terminal, his eyes scanning the screen, unblinking. He didn't react right away, just turned to Derek, who was elbow-deep in a disassembled atmospheric sensor unit. "You may want to sit down for this," Jeune said quietly. "Frozen moons." "I'm already kneeling in a service hatch." They ratified the Culinary Amendment. Unity Chili is approved for sanctioned preparation under controlled settings, full probationary status. Derek froze. "You're not joking." "I would never joke about procedural law." The screen updated again. Subheading, Note, previous prohibitions under Regulation ZR April 1st, 12 remain in effect. This decision does not nullify prior sanctions. See Appendix D for procedural exceptions. Jeune tilted his head. "It's a conditional approval. You are banned from making chili, but Project Ember is not." Derek sat back, 1 greasy glove on his forehead. "So I'm still banned, but my recipe is allowed." "Correct. And I can't cook it." "No. But someone else can." "Yes. In your presence. Under supervision. With a certified neutral culinary officer." Derek stared at the bulkhead for a long moment, then laughed a short, sharp sound that made a passing technician raise an eyebrow. "I've been outlawed from cooking my own creation," he said. "Officially canonized and personally forbidden." "That's poetic." "It's bureaucracy," Jun said, "but also victory." The station's council sent formal congratulations, with language so polished it almost sounded sincere. Derek received a plaque. It was shaped like a chili pepper and made of compressed synth ceramic. It weighed nearly 4 pounds and had no obvious function. He kept it on a shelf in his quarters next to a canister of dried oregano and a photo of Earth. Unity Chile became a recurring part of station life, first at regulated cultural events, then in small test offerings. It even received a nutritional evaluation from 3 species health boards and passed all with minor cautionary flags. People lined up for it not because it was safe, but because they remembered what it had been before it was safe. A month after ratification, the station hosted its first Interstellar Culinary Showcase. Over 50 dishes were presented, with a third of them adapted to accommodate human tolerance thresholds. The centerpiece was a single sealed cauldron of Unity chili, prepared under medical supervision, with Derek watching from a regulation-mandated 3-meter distance. He wasn't allowed to stir it, not even once. "You could petition for a personal exemption," Sari said as she passed him a spoonful. She had begun visiting more frequently, often bringing data logs masked as food containers. "And what would that look like?" Derek asked. "Pleading before a committee of 12 species for the right to sear peppers again?" "You've done harder things," she said, shrugging. The chili that day had a subtle sweetness. June had added crushed plenary fruit rind for balance. Derek tasted it and raised an eyebrow. "You improved it." June looked up from his bowl. "I replicated your ratios and adjusted for aromatic volatility. It's what you would have done." Derek sat back, watching others around them eat, converse, even laugh. A Frox engineer stood next to a human pilot, comparing bite reactions. A Raxi ambassador dipped spicy root in the broth and offered a quiet, respectful nod. The memory of the original incident hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed, woven into shared caution and collective storytelling. One morning, nearly a cycle later, Derek received an unexpected transmission from Earth. It came from a small culinary institute based in Denver, where someone had submitted a cultural food dossier detailing the chili saga on Alora 7. The institute had awarded him honorary recognition for contribution to interstellar gastronomy. It arrived with a certificate, a handwritten note, and a sealed package. Inside was a jar of ground ancho chilies, legal for non-preparatory use. A small gesture, but it reminded him of home. Later that week, Sari found him alone on the upper docking platform, seated beside a cargo crate and holding the unopened jar in his hands. "Smells like childhood," he said. "Smells like trouble," she replied. They sat in silence for a while, watching a supply shuttle drift into position, its retro thrusters casting slow amber arcs across the docking bay. "You ever think about going back?" she asked. He considered. "Sometimes, but here we built something real. I don't think I'd be allowed to light that fire again down there." "I could smuggle in a hot plate," she offered. He smiled. "You've changed. Or you're contagious." They stood together as the shuttle doors cycled open, letting in a gust of station-filtered air that no longer carried the sting of scorched spices, just clean, recycled oxygen and the scent of steel warmed by solar radiation. Later that evening, Derek returned to his quarters. He placed the chili jar beside the synth ceramic plaque and sat down at his small table. He didn't light anything, didn't cook. He just opened the jar, let the scent drift gently into the room, and closed his eyes. For a moment, he was back in that bubbling room of chaos and laughter, of coughs and camaraderie, of fear and spice and shared experience. He didn't need to cook it again. The memory had flavor enough. He reached over and scrawled a single line into his datapad's logbook. "No one ever bonded over a fruit salad." Then he turned off the light,